The moment I took the ring off was like the last chord in a musical composition. It sparkled in the light, like the only symbol of our love that I had once worn with pride. But that night, like all the other moments he and I had once shared, it was no longer a sign of happiness for me. It was a sign of the end. I turned the ring on my finger, realizing that after 5 years of a relationship and a year and a half of wedding preparations, everything was falling apart. My fingers trembled as I carefully removed it. It was so beautiful, a huge diamond that had once been the entire universe to me. But now, it was just a piece of jewelry, a piece of metal and glass. I stared at it and felt tears welling up, but inside, I felt like I had to be strong. It wasn't about losing the ring, it was about losing myself. The phone lying on the table began to vibrate. It was a message from Alex, a letter from someone who was once my future. My eyes locked onto the screen and I felt the emptiness fill me. He wrote, "I can't go to the wedding tomorrow. I need time to think about it. I'm sorry." Those few words were like a knife to my heart. Not a phone call, not an explanation, just a text. I reread it over and over again, trying to see if maybe it was a joke. But all I got in response was silence. No call, no words, just a text. I'll never forget how in that moment it became clear to me he wasn't mine anymore. And in that moment I realized everything I'd been through, all those years, all my efforts, were not worth it for him to even talk to me face to face. It was his decision, and I had no right to my choice. I wasn't going to continue this. As much as it hurt, I took a step back. "Keep it," I whispered, looking at the ring. "I'll sell it and use the money to start a new life where you won't find me." My body felt tense, but there was a strange calm inside me. My head felt empty, but I still smiled when Sarah came over with another cocktail and made me toast. The club was full of people, and my friend kept dancing in the club, wearing a t-shirt that said Team Bride. Everyone around me was so happy and carefree, while my chest felt heavy and empty. My phone rang again, and I picked it up, still with a smile on my lips. But when I saw the name on the screen, everything stopped. It wasn't him, it was that text again. I kept staring at the screen as if hoping that now there would be a follow-up, that he would say, "Just kidding," or "I can't do that." But nothing followed. I didn't feel angry or hurt, I only felt tired. In that moment, I realized that this whole situation was like a song I couldn't listen to anymore. "I can't believe he did that," Sarah said, noticing how my smile disappeared. "I mean, he just had to tell you that with a face, not a text." But there was only one thing inside me: calm. It was everything. I wasn't going to fight for him. His leaving was my release. The phone rang again, and I picked it up. This time it was his mother, Laura. She never used my first name, always calling me by my last name. She calmly asked me to return the ring, and I could feel her voice starting to irritate me. She didn't say a word about her son canceling the wedding hours before, and instead demanded the jewelry back. Folding the phone in my hand, I couldn't believe she'd even dared to call. She hadn't mentioned that the ring was an heirloom. I remembered exactly how Alex had bought it. The exact same way he'd shown me the receipt. It was new. It wasn't some ancient legacy. I remembered picking it out with him at Tiffany's boutique. Through Laura's strained words, I couldn't help but chuckle. I imagined how she was always trying to control our lives just like her son. "Keep the ring," I said. "I don't need it back." I could feel my resolve growing stronger. The thing was no longer a symbol of love to me. It became a symbol of how I was allowing myself to be manipulated. After the call, I didn't feel destroyed. Rather, I felt strong. I turned the ring in my hands and looked at it as if for the last time. I never thought that the ring that once symbolized my affection would become something I needed to let go of. The phone rang again. My girlfriend started asking questions I didn't know the answer to. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. I looked at them and said one thing: "I'm not going to wait any longer." And I wasn't going to go back to the past that had been so forced upon me. Instead, I was deciding to start a new life, and the ring was a symbol of that decision. I took the first step. I made the decision not to be the woman who continued to fight for a relationship that no longer existed. Every day, I became more and more determined, and the morning I realized that I was going to live for myself. Paris was my fresh start, my freedom and my choice. The noise of the party drowned out all my thoughts as Sarah ran up to me with a new cocktail and made me raise it in the air. "Come on, one more sip before you get married," she shouted with a smile on her face. The music pulsed around us, and the girls, wearing matching Team Bride t-shirts, danced around us, not thinking about what tomorrow had in store for us. This night was supposed to be full of fun, and the last carefree day before the wedding. But inside me was something else entirely. I stood in the center of the hall holding a glass of pink drink, but my thoughts were somewhere far away. My gaze was caught on the screen of my phone when it started vibrating again. It was his call. Alex. I slowly pulled it out of my bag, taking my time with a smile that didn't feel like a smile on my face. Everyone knew how much I loved him, but in this moment, love seemed like something foreign to me, inconsequential. I was ready to laugh at how jealous he was that I was enjoying the evening without him. But I was wrong. When I opened the message, everything in my head flipped. His words were simple. "I can't go to the wedding. I need time to think about it. I'm sorry." I reread it 3 times, expecting him to make a joke, but nothing changed. He didn't call me out on it, didn't try to justify himself, didn't offer to talk about it all. He just backed off. The word sorry wasn't enough to explain everything he'd hurt me. It was just a cold, merciless message. Sarah noticed my face go pale and grabbed my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, seeing me stare at the screen with a blank expression. My inner world was crumbling, and I couldn't find the words. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I had already predicted that our day would be special, but no way was it going to be like this. I felt a strange emptiness inside, mixed with bitterness and anger. "He can't do this," Sarah uttered, squeezing my hands. I couldn't answer. All words seemed useless. I didn't need to explain anything else. No excuses or regrets could bring back the man I loved, the one who now appeared to be a stranger. That emptiness I felt when I read his message was the beginning of my new life, one that no longer included him. Thoughts of the wedding, our future, all the plans and dreams came crashing down on me like a snowstorm. My last day as a bride was supposed to be a moment of happiness and excitement, but it became the moment I was no longer his bride. Sarah held out a glass to me, hoping to bring me back to reality. I hugged her, and my friends around me started dancing like nothing had happened. I was among them, but not with them at all. It was like I was in another world where everything was happening in slow motion. The music was blaring, the dancing was going on, and everything was sparkling with bright lights. But for me, all these sounds and images blended into one unbroken void. My attention was consumed by only one thing, his message. It wasn't just betrayal, it was destruction. The destruction of what I thought was our love, our history. Sarah noticed I wasn't moving and walked over to me with surprise in her eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked again, holding out her hand. I couldn't answer. My eyes stopped on the screen. It was like I couldn't look away from what he had written. I thought he would be with me, that he would be there for me in this moment on the most important day. But instead, I was alone. And in that moment, I didn't feel grief like I expected, but something stranger, emptiness. My phone started vibrating again, and I grabbed it nervously, expecting it to be him, again trying to explain his act. But nothing. Nothing again. Just another text from him, now with the words, "I can't explain it. I need time." But was that even an explanation? I felt like something was breaking inside me. This wasn't my Alex. He wasn't mine anymore. The one I loved was gone. That's when I realized it wasn't real. It was an illusion I'd built for myself. I had tried to hold on to the relationship, but now I felt like I had to let it all go. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew for sure that I wasn't going to go back to that person. My world had changed. It wasn't the way I had envisioned it. In that moment, I felt like my dreams didn't make sense, that everything I was striving for wasn't mine. It was the moment I began to let go. When I got back to Sarah's apartment, my friends were still partying, not realizing the gravity of what had happened. Some offered to keep the party going. Some sat with their phones. Some were still trying to get into the dance, but I was out of it all. All I could feel was my hands shaking as I held the phone. Each new text from him felt like an extra blow, and I couldn't understand why I was still trying to find an explanation for what he'd done. Why did I keep looking at his words in the first place? Why did his texts still have power over me? That was the moment I realized it was time to act. I was sitting on the couch, hugging my pillow, and normal life was going on around me. No one knew that there was a real storm going on inside. And realized that I was safe here in Paris. I could build anew, and it was all under my control. My morning started with my usual cup of coffee and an easy walk around the neighborhood. Everything was familiar but new nonetheless. I could feel my life filling with confidence, and with each passing day I realized more and more that I now had control over how the future would unfold. I wasn't the person who once tried to please others. I was me, and it was beautiful. Every day in Paris brought something new. The weather changed from sunny days to rainy days, and in this changing rhythm, I began to see a reflection of myself. I stopped waiting for someone else to determine my path. I started taking action, looking for opportunities, and meeting people who were just like me, striving for freedom and self-expression. My life became a little more fulfilling. I began to receive offers for collaboration from local art galleries and met artists who shared their views on creativity. I listened to their every word because these people, like me, were searching for their own way and were not afraid to show their vulnerability. At some point, I decided that I needed to learn more about myself, to try to paint for real without thinking that someone might not like it. I enrolled in painting classes to delve deeper into the art I had loved for so long, but couldn't realize. Here in Paris, I had everything I needed to start from scratch. There were no conditions, no limitations. It was just mine. One evening, strolling through Montmartre, I met a woman who was a real revelation to me. Her name was Claudette, and she was an artist who inspired with every word she spoke. We talked about Paris, about life, about creativity, and I felt my soul fill up. She told me about her studio, about her work, about how important it is for an artist to follow his inner path. And her words became a guiding star for me. "You're here for a reason," she told me when I shared my experiences with her. "You're looking for yourself, and Paris gives you everything you need to find it. You just have to follow your inspiration." Claudette became a true example of strength and independence for me. Her confidence was inspiring. She showed me how important it is not to stop, not to be afraid to open up to new possibilities. At that moment, I felt myself letting go of everything that was holding me back before and starting to move forward. As time went on, I became more and more immersed in this new world. Paris became for me not just a place where I escaped from my past, but a real arena where I could finally be myself. My life was no longer a shadow of what I had left behind. Instead, I began to create my own story without looking back. Each new day in Paris brought me joys as well as challenges. I still struggled with doubts, with what I had left behind. Sometimes, when I woke up, I felt an emptiness that suddenly reminded me of what I had lost. But this emptiness wasn't painful. It was the kind of emptiness that allowed me to fill it anew. I wasn't afraid of these feelings because I realized they were part of my process of becoming. Eventually, I realized that my purpose in life was no longer about seeking acceptance from others. I realized that I just needed to be honest with myself. I wanted to find my true self without compromise, without obsequiousness. And despite all the challenges, I felt more and more opportunities opening up every day. I was beginning to realize that this new life was far more vibrant and fulfilling than I had ever imagined. My watercolor set that I always kept on hand became like a symbol for me. It held not only art, but freedom. The freedom to be real. In the painting class I continued to take, I found myself drawn not just to paint, but to express myself, my emotions, my essence. The letter I had sent to Alex a few months ago now felt like an act of purification. I was no longer attached to those memories. I wasn't attached to the image Alex was trying to impose on me. I began to accept my vulnerability, my weaknesses, and turn them into strength. In those moments, I realized how lucky I was to have taken that step. Paris became not just a city, but a second chance at life. And that was far more important than anything I had lost. In this city, I could be myself, even if I had to start from scratch. And then one day, after a few months filled with searching and inner changes, I felt that I didn't just live in Paris anymore. I was part of this city. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw something in my eyes that wasn't there before: confidence and calmness. I was ready to build my new life without thinking about what had gone before. That moment when I felt confident didn't come right away. Paris gave me an opportunity, but true freedom started with myself. I realized that I could no longer stay in a place where I would expect change from anyone. All I needed was to decide to be myself, to not depend on the opinions of others, and most importantly, to stop being tied to the past. I was ready to move on, to build my life without looking back at the mistakes I had made before. One day when I met Claudette in her studio, I realized that everything I had experienced had brought me here. It wasn't just a place where I was learning to paint. It was a place where I was learning to be real, where I was learning to be free. Claudette noticed my changes, and her words in that moment became especially important to me. "You're here for a reason," she told me, smiling. "You came here to find yourself, and you did. Now the world is in your hands." I stood in her studio, realizing how important it was to believe in myself, how important it was to let go of everything that was holding me back. I looked at my artwork. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Each painting was a part of my journey. It was a symbol of how I was changing. I could create something of my own that belonged only to me, and that process was far more valuable than any outcome. In that moment, standing in the studio, I decided that I would keep going. I would paint, explore, find my place in the world, and build my life anew. I was ready for new possibilities. My story was just beginning, and now I could rest assured that what lay ahead of me was only what I chose. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling of loneliness that came sometimes, especially during the night hours. Immersed in a new world, I was faced with the inevitable feeling that there was still something missing. Yes, I took a huge step by going to Paris, leaving everything behind. But strangely enough, in those moments as the city quieted down and night fell, I began to feel vulnerable. But I was ready for it. I knew that being alone was not a sign of weakness, but a chance for growth. It was a moment for me to truly learn to live in harmony with myself. And even though I missed familiar faces, loved ones, those who had supported me in the past, I didn't feel pain. Everything was somehow calmer. I accepted this loneliness as part of the journey. I began to seek and find solace in myself. Paris was my salvation. Despite the darkness of the night, I felt this city, its dark streets lit by lights, becoming my second home. I walked the streets when everyone else had already gone home. Here I could be alone and still feel part of something big. In this city full of history, art, and new opportunities, I felt like I was on a stage with a starring role to play. It was not just an escape, but a true renewal. But loneliness, I realized, did not mean isolation. On the contrary, it gave me freedom. I learned to enjoy my time, to listen to myself more, and to make choices that were mine alone. I stopped waiting for external validation and gradually felt how this city became more than just a place for me to escape from the past. It became the arena for my new beginning. Paris gave me the chance to choose my path without looking back, to not depend on other people's expectations, and to be honest with myself. I was ready to do anything to make this beginning my future. My morning began with the customary cup of coffee, and I was off for another walk. The walls of the city hid secrets and stories that I was trying to understand, and in these walks I was searching for my place. Paris wasn't just a place, it was my time, and I began to feel a new confidence sweeping over me. As much as I tried to convince myself that everything around me was a new chance, every now and then reality would hit me. In moments of peace and quiet, I still felt heavy. Despite the bright nights, the inspiring walks in Montmartre, and meeting new people, the thoughts of what had happened never stopped in my head. I tried to explain to myself that I was right, that I had made the right choice, but sometimes doubt followed me like a shadow. One such day started with me discovering a strange feeling of emptiness. It wasn't the emptiness I felt when I first came here. It was something different. I came to the studio to finish my painting, but somehow I couldn't focus. Something was getting in my way. My brain was distracted by the smallest details, and I caught myself thinking that I wasn't internally ready to let go of everything completely. It was a moment of doubt when I didn't know if it was the right decision to be here, in this city, far away from everything that was familiar and familiar. Yet despite this strange weakness, I didn't stop. I kept painting. I kept exploring the city. I walked the streets when I felt like I couldn't go back to my familiar life. But even here in Paris, I was beginning to feel the heaviness of the past slipping away. Those small moments of dissatisfaction with myself were only a temporary deterrent. I knew I needed to overcome these feelings because they weren't a part of me. They were just fear of something new, something I couldn't yet realize. I started spending more time in galleries, talking to artists who turned out to be very different, but at some point each of them became important to me. It was all part of my journey. I began to feel old problems dissolving into new acquaintances and experiences. Even if a difficulty arose in my life, I knew I could handle it. I began to feel old problems dissolving into new acquaintances and experiences. Even if a difficulty arose in my life, I knew I could handle it. I began to realize that in Paris, despite all its light and dark sides, I could be myself. This freedom came at a price, but I was willing to fight for it. I kept working, moving forward, meeting people, enjoying life, and learning to live with myself. I wasn't ready for complete isolation. Not after everything I had been through, but in this new relationship I was building with this city and with myself, I was finally starting to feel that Paris could be the place I had chosen for myself. With each new day, I felt more and more like the boundaries I had built around myself for so long were disappearing. The tranquility I felt when sitting in my Parisian cafe or walking through its quiet streets became the new standard for my life. I began to realize that every moment spent here wasn't just part of the journey. It was becoming part of my real life. I wasn't just a tourist. I was a part of this city, a piece of it. Living in Paris taught me an important lesson. Relationships, whether with people or with myself, are not built on expectations. They are built on honesty and acceptance. And the moment I realized this, something inside me changed. I stopped expecting things from others. I stopped expecting change, that someone would change for me, or that my life would improve if I did what others expected. Instead, I started building a relationship with myself, which allowed me to see the world and the people around me in a new light. My journey here in Paris has been more than just a physical move. It has been an inner journey that has helped me let go of old resentments and build bridges instead of walls. I started meeting people who supported me, inspired me, but didn't expect me to be different. I didn't feel pressured. I was my own person. Meeting artists, people with whom I shared my journey of finding. Inspiration and self-expression were valuable lessons for me. They taught me to open up to new people and, most importantly, to be open to myself. One day, I met a young woman named Marie, who was also an artist who had come to Paris to find her way. We quickly found common ground, and our conversations about painting, art, and life became important to me. Marie was not only an artist, but also a psychologist unto herself. She would talk about her thoughts and experiences, and through these conversations, I realized that despite all my moments of loneliness, I was not alone in my feelings. There were many people in the world who were also searching for themselves and something more. I realized that perhaps I had found my own world among these people and places. I began to notice new friends and support coming into my life. Although I was still searching for myself, I no longer felt like I needed to control everything or look for someone to save me. I realized that I could become the person I wanted to be on my own. I stopped looking at the past. I started looking to the future with confidence. Paris gave me not only a space to express myself, but also a real inspiration. I began to pursue painting with more confidence than ever before. I wasn't just a student in an art studio, I was an artist, and that inspired me. Every stroke on the canvas became a step towards myself. I could feel my brush conveying not only feelings, but emotions that I had hidden from myself for a long time. As time went on, I began to exhibit my work in small galleries in the city. This was the moment when I realized that I was not just painting for myself, but also for others. I saw how people reacted to my paintings, how they perceived my experiences through art. It was a new level of self-expression. My paintings weren't perfect, but they were real, and that was what mattered most. One day, at one of these shows, I met a man who became a symbol for me of how much things can change if you let go. His name was Pierre. He was an artist, but a more mature one, with a wealth of experience and perspective on life. Pierre was not the figure I once thought I needed to be around the man who would decide my life. Pierre was someone I could talk to about life, about finding myself, about freedom and independence. We talked at length, sharing thoughts about what it means to be a true artist in this world, and in those conversations, I felt how I no longer needed to wait for someone to be me. In Paris, I became truly free. And although I didn't have a clear answer to what would happen next, I wasn't worried anymore. I was ready for a new stage in my life. The city gave me everything I was looking for, not just freedom, but the realization that I was in charge of my own life. My life in Paris was still in its infancy, but already I felt that this step was the right one. The day I decided it was time to move on started like all the others, but different from them. I stood at the window, cup of coffee in hand, and watched a new day blossom outside. The weather was changeable, but there was something special about it. It was as if the universe itself was telling me that today would be the moment when I would take a new step. I realized that I couldn't stay in this search for myself any longer. The time had come. My journey in Paris became not only a search for a new life, but also a search for myself. And although this journey was far from easy, I no longer felt fear. I learned to let go. I learned not to hold on to the past, not to try to get back what I can't get back. Every moment I spent here was a step towards a new life, a new freedom. Paris became more than just a city for me. It was a symbol that I was able to stand on my feet, to free myself from everything that was pulling me back. It became my home, my space to grow and express myself. I learned that every day is a chance to be better than yesterday. I looked for myself in the pictures and the people in every moment, and gradually I became more and more at ease. There was no more despair, no more pain like when I first came here. But despite all of that, I felt like I needed to take one more step. I had to leave behind everything that was connected to the past and completely free myself. I couldn't stay here if I kept going back in my head to what had gone before. And so after much thought, I decided it was time. Time to truly end this cycle. Paris had given me everything I was looking for, and now I was ready to move on. This day was like the beginning of a new chapter. I knew everything in my life had changed, but despite that, something inside of me remained held back, unresolved. Finally letting go was difficult, no matter how hard I tried. Even in this new world in which I was searching for my place, I couldn't completely rid myself of old memories. For a moment, I felt like I still had to do something to finally part with what I had left behind. I walked through the familiar streets of Paris, stopping at the very cafe where I once sat contemplating the future. Everything seemed so familiar but new at the same time. I could look at these places in peace without feeling the pain, without feeling the heaviness. I had made this decision. I realized that my journey here was not finished, but I had to complete it. I couldn't leave a part of myself in the past by staying here. It was the moment I realized that all I had to do was let go. So I did. When I returned to my apartment, I felt everything in my life change. That step was the final step. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't pause my life again, waiting for someone to change or for the future to give me some other chance. No, I was ready to move forward into the unknown, but now with a sense of freedom, confidence, and self-sufficiency. I felt that every moment I had experienced had prepared me for this. This move would not have been possible without everything that had happened before. Paris not only opened my mind to new horizons, it helped me become who I am. And now that I was ready to let go, I felt the world become mine. As the days passed, I began to inspiration and self-expression were valuable lessons for me. They taught me to open up to new people and, most importantly, to be open to myself. One day, I met a young woman named Marie, who was also an artist who had come to Paris to find her way. We quickly found common ground, and our conversations about painting, art, and life became important to me. Marie was not only an artist, but also a psychologist unto herself. She would talk about her thoughts and experiences, and through these conversations, I realized that despite all my moments of loneliness, I was not alone in my feelings. There were many people in the world who were also searching for themselves and something more. I realized that perhaps I had found my own world among these people and places. I began to notice new friends and support coming into my life. Although I was still searching for myself, I no longer felt like I needed to control everything or look for someone to save me. I realized that I could become the person I wanted to be on my own. I stopped looking at the past. I started looking to the future with confidence. Paris gave me not only a space to express myself, but also a real inspiration. I began to pursue painting with more confidence than ever before. I wasn't just a student in an art studio, I was an artist, and that inspired me. Every stroke on the canvas became a step towards myself. I could feel my brush conveying not only feelings, but emotions that I had hidden from myself for a long time. As time went on, I began to exhibit my work in small galleries in the city. This was the moment when I realized that I was not just painting for myself, but also for others. I saw how people reacted to my paintings, how they perceived my experiences through art. It was a new level of self-expression. My paintings weren't perfect, but they were real, and that was what mattered most. One day, at one of these shows, I met a man who became a symbol for me of how much things can change if you let go. His name was Pierre. He was an artist, but a more mature one, with a wealth of experience and perspective on life. Pierre was not the figure I once thought I needed to be around the man who would decide my life. Pierre was someone I could talk to about life, about finding myself, about freedom and independence. We talked at length, sharing thoughts about what it means to be a true artist in this world, and in those conversations, I felt how I no longer needed to wait for someone to be me. In Paris, I became truly free. And although I didn't have a clear answer to what would happen next, I wasn't worried anymore. I was ready for a new stage in my life. The city gave me everything I was looking for, not just freedom, but the realization that I was in charge of my own life. My life in Paris was still in its infancy, but already I felt that this step was the right one. The day I decided it was time to move on started like all the others, but different from them. I stood at the window, cup of coffee in hand, and watched a new day blossom outside. The weather was changeable, but there was something special about it. It was as if the universe itself was telling me that today would be the moment when I would take a new step. I realized that I couldn't stay in this search for myself any longer. The time had come. My journey in Paris became not only a search for a new life, but also a search for myself. And although this journey was far from easy, I no longer felt fear. I learned to let go. I learned not to hold on to the past, not to try to get back what I can't get back. Every moment I spent here was a step towards a new life, a new freedom. Paris became more than just a city for me. It was a symbol that I was able to stand on my feet, of me. And I just silently felt the destruction of what we were building, taking over every cell in my body. All I could feel was an inner sense of heaviness and emptiness, replacing what was once fun and joy. My mind tried to take a step forward, realizing that deep down I had already lost all faith in him. I wasn't ready to be in this waiting for him to come back again. No, I was ready to close this chapter. No matter how hard it was, not for his sake, for myself. Sarah noticed I wasn't moving and came over to me with a concerned look. "Are you okay? Maybe you should talk?" she asked, taking a seat next to me. I looked at her and took a deep breath. In that moment, I felt my inner world change. I raised my head and met her gaze. All I could say was, "I need time, Sarah. I need time to figure out what to do next." Then my phone rang again, and I glanced at it. It was a message from his mother, Laura. How much longer do I have to put up with this? She was demanding the ring back. I don't even know why I didn't explode at that moment. Maybe I was just too burned out, too exhausted. But I remembered the moment Alex handed me that ring. It wasn't a family heirloom, as Laura had claimed. It was a ring he'd bought just 3 weeks ago. We'd been at Tiffany's boutique, and he'd proudly shown me the receipt. And now she was demanding it back, as if I had to surrender for her sake the symbol of what I thought had once been our love. "Keep the ring," I whispered, feeling the word make my soul feel lighter. "I'll sell it and use the money to start a new life in a place where you won't find me." Those words were full of a strength I hadn't expected to find in myself. I was no longer the woman who succumbed to his manipulations. I was beginning to move forward. I woke up the next morning with an unusual feeling of emptiness. But this emptiness wasn't scary. Everything that was happening seemed clear, right? I was no longer part of the life I existed in, relying on another person. My phone kept ringing. Messages poured in one after another, but they all went unanswered. I didn't want to relive that moment again. I knew I wouldn't expect him to apologize or explain to me again. It wasn't important. After I talked to Sarah, I realized that I was drawn to change, to release. This day, which I thought would be the beginning of a new life with Alex, was actually the day I set myself free. As strange as it sounds, I felt light. And that lightness allowed me to see everything in a new light. That day, I didn't just sit in a room with my friends, upset. I looked at my ring, which had come to symbolize betrayal, and I made a decision. I decided not to let myself be weak, not to let that ring and its actions pull me down. I turned to Sarah and told her what I was going to do. I need to sell this ring, use the money to start a new life, and I need to go to Paris. Sarah, of course, was shocked but supportive. This was my moment, my chance to change everything. I realized that I might not be ready for what was to come, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going back to the life I had with him. I would not go back to living my life submitting to his wants, his needs. Now I was deciding what would happen next. "Paris?" she asked. "Yes, I will go. Things will be different. I will find myself there," I replied. At that moment, I didn't know exactly what lay ahead of me, but I was ready to face whatever was to come. I stood up and looked out the window, envisioning a bright future full of new opportunities. This was my chance, and I knew this was the step I had to take. I stood at the window of the small apartment that was now my new home. Through the glass, I had a view of Paris, a city that in the past had seemed something far away and unattainable. But here I was, standing in the center of this magical world, and I felt the air fill with freedom. I never thought I would end up here, that I would take this step, but when I looked back at all that was left behind, I knew it was the right choice. I was no longer the woman Alex had left behind. I was new, independent, strong, and ready to live for myself. The sky was cloudy and the rain was drizzling, but it was the perfect day for me. The kind of day where everything seemed possible. There was a misty freshness in the air that seemed to symbolize that I had started a new life. In this city, I could start with a clean slate. I didn't know what was in store for me, but I could feel that this emptiness that had been left in my heart was being filled with something important, something new, something that was mine. My new apartment was small but cozy. Spacious ceiling, antique wooden floors, and one window overlooking the street lined with cafes and vintage bookstores. I unpacked a few suitcases that held my favorite things. A picture with my parents, a framed letter from my grandmother, and a small watercolor set I had bought before the trip. I didn't know how long it would take me to fully realize this step, but I could feel it in me to want to move on. I walked outside, breathing in the air of Paris, that wonderful, fresh, and slightly cool air. My feet were treading the ancient sidewalks, and without realizing it, I was already getting used to the new rhythm of life. Everything was so different in this city. Every corner, every step seemed part of a long-awaited new journey. I couldn't help but think that this place was like a white canvas on which I could now paint my story without thinking about the past. I began to get used to the noise of Paris, the sounds of bicycles, conversations in French, the smell of fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery. It was all new and a little overwhelming. Every day I discovered something interesting. One of the first days I went to the market to buy groceries. The city was full of life, and the street vendors offered their wares with such gusto that I couldn't help but smile. Smiling became a frequent companion these days. It was easier for me to smile when there was such energy around me. I began to adapt to my new surroundings, feeling more and more like I was becoming a part of this city. I registered for a few painting classes, and although the first classes weren't as easy as I expected, I felt like there was something important about it. My hands that hadn't held a brush before were now painting lines, shapes, new worlds. Watercolor was gradually transforming my tentative movements into something more beautiful, something that could become my own. In the evening, I would go for walks around Paris, enjoying the night lights and the hazy glow of the street lamps. Here I could be myself, and although it was scary, at the same time I felt that this place had become something of a refuge for me. I was no longer the one who had left it. I had found myself again, and on those evening walks through the streets of Paris, I was searching for my new identity, and I was finding it. My first morning in my new place was marked by bright sunlight streaming through the window. I sat at my desk, sipping my coffee and looking at a map of Paris. I thought about the many new steps ahead of me. I could do whatever I wanted, and it was scary, but also incredibly liberating. I didn't know how long it would take me to realize that this step was the right one in my life, but I knew that every moment here in Paris was my chance for a new life. The first few weeks in Paris were a real eye-opener for me. Time was passing, but I wasn't in a hurry. I let myself be here, in this wonderful city where every moment felt like a new opportunity. Everything seemed at once bright and light, but at the same time unknowable and full of challenges. These days were filled with trying to make sense of the new rhythm of life, meeting people who were also searching for their place in this huge and multi-layered city. Every morning, I went out for a walk through the streets, breathing in that extraordinary, fresh Parisian air with pleasure. The French architecture, the old buildings, and the cafes, where it was so cozy to sit with a cup of coffee and watch the world go by, were all like one big miracle to me. I continued to explore the city, and it seemed like every walk opened up new horizons for me. Everything seemed so real and alive that I stopped worrying about leaving everything behind. Paris was ready to become a new home. One day, while walking through the Latin Quarter, I entered a small bookstore. There, I met Claudette, a woman with silver black hair, stylish and confident, with a brightly colored scarf that made her look particularly elegant. She was an older woman, but there was such a light in her eyes that it was hard to believe she wasn't younger. "Bonjour," she said as I entered her store. I responded to her greeting, a little nervous that my French left a lot to be desired. Claudette noticed my embarrassment and immediately started speaking in English. "You're not from Paris?" she asked with a curious look. I explained to her that I had just arrived and that this was my first month in the city. "So you're looking for a new beginning," Claudette said with a warmth that immediately put me at ease. It was like a sign, as if the universe was sending me a signal that I was on the right path. She walked me around the store, showing me books and telling me stories of how she came here decades ago and how this store became her home. I enjoyed listening to her because I felt like she was opening the door to a new world for me with every word. We talked about life, and Claudette suggested that I become part of her circle by introducing me to the artists and writers who frequented her store. There was something special in her eyes, and I felt that this acquaintance was momentous. As it turned out, Claudette was like a second mother to many people in this city, and I realized that it was encounters like this that made Paris my home. Every morning I woke up feeling like I had the whole world in my hands. In Paris, I was able to find not only a new home, but also myself. Things that seemed important before now seemed trivial. I no longer thought about the past, worried about Lucas, or tried to go back to the way things once were. I realized that the man I loved so much was just a part of my life, not the foundation of it. My watercolor set was always there for me, and every day I immersed myself in painting, trying to translate all my feelings into pictures. In these moments, I did not feel alone. The brush in my hands and the sounds of Paris coming from the open window became my companions. I began to realize that Paris had given me a chance to be myself. The dreams I had once left for later were now becoming my reality. One evening, sitting in a cafe on the street, I received an unexpected message from Sarah. She informed me that she had come to Paris to congratulate me on my new beginning. I was happy that she supported my decision and decided to come. Sarah had always been there for me when I was having a hard time, and now that she and I had met, I felt my confidence in my new path grow stronger. We walked around Paris at night, and I told her about how everything here seemed alive, full of color and light. Sarah looked at me and smiled. "You've changed," she said. "You've become truly free." Her words sank into my soul. Yes, I was free. I was ready to live here in this city, with this new chapter of my life that was no longer about what I had left behind, but about what lay ahead. And now, as I stood here in the heart of Paris, I knew that everything that had happened was necessary for me to become the person I was meant to be. Each day in Paris was beginning to feel more and more real and familiar, despite all the changes this change had brought to my life. Walking around the city at night became my ritual, and each time I discovered new corners of Paris that surprised and inspired me. But despite this outward calm, there was still uncertainty inside me. I couldn't let go of what I had left behind. Alex, his words, his actions. They were still with me just like before, even if I tried to let them go. Every time I looked out the window of my small apartment, thoughts of him hovered restlessly in my head. I couldn't just let go of how much time we'd spent together, how much there was to that love. But every day I realized more and more that not going back to that life was my freedom. I wasn't going to be disappointed again. This city, its atmosphere, its light, they became a symbol for me of a new path, a path where I decided for myself what would happen next. The bustling city, all those emotions, new acquaintances, but they couldn't fill the void that Alex left behind. When I woke up in the morning, I had to remind myself that this moment, this day was mine. I wasn't going to fight for something that no longer existed. And it was in those moments, as I sat by the window and looked out over Paris, that I began to realize that this new step was the only right one. Everything that I had felt before, everything that was connected to him, it was now a thing of the past. I began to prepare myself for a new life, for new changes. New horizons were appearing on the horizon, and I began to realize that there was no end to these changes. I took French lessons, enrolled in painting studios, because I knew that here in Paris I could be myself. And this realization brought me relief that at some point I would let go of everything that was pulling me back. My mornings in Paris were not the same. I wasn't thinking about how I was going to take the ring back or trying to do things the way I wanted to do them before. I sat at my desk and stared at my phone screen, not wanting to answer the calls that were pouring in from acquaintances and friends. Everyone was trying to be supportive. Everyone was trying to understand, but they didn't know that I had already made my decision. I wasn't ready to go back to that old life where Alex was the center of my world. Sarah had already left and I was still here, alone. But there was no loneliness in that. Paris, its bright lights and vibrant streets, seemed like living proof that I could be anyone I wanted to be. Not who Alex made me be, but who I always wanted to be. That's what I filled every day with. And so, sitting in the cafe enjoying a cup of coffee, I felt at peace for the first time. I was me again, and that was the most important thing. As soon as I got back to my apartment, I sat down and wrote the letter that seemed to be my biggest step toward liberation. It wasn't long, but it was honest. I no longer felt any pain, anger, or hatred. I just didn't want to be with a man who didn't see me for who I was anymore. And in that letter, I wrote to him for the first time that I didn't want to be a part of his life anymore. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't wait for answers. I just wrote him, "Thank you for canceling our wedding. It was the best gift you could have given me." I didn't expect a response, but the letter was written and it was my decision. I read it several times before sending it, and at one point I felt something inside me thaw. It was a release, not from him, but from myself, the one who kept living in the past, trying to get back something that no longer existed. Despite all the sure steps I took, despite the decisions I made, life kept throwing questions at me. Every morning when I woke up in my small apartment in Paris, I felt light, but I was still under the weight of thoughts of the past. They wouldn't let me go at once. And even though I strived to be happy, to achieve things that I hadn't in my old life, I realized that I had to learn to live with the burden. My first month in Paris was full of discoveries. New people, new life, new opportunities. But behind it all, I felt something inside me still ached. It wasn't the pain of loss, more like the realization that I had spent a lot of time building a future that ended up being an illusion. Sometimes I felt like I had lost not just a person, but a part of myself. I remembered how I believed in us, in our future. But now I had a whole different world in front of me, a world I'd built for myself, a world where I could be me. After I sent the letter to Alex, I felt relieved, but with each passing day, the realization came to me that nothing else would ever come back. He had been a part of my life, but now that I had let him go, I felt like that moment of release was key. But even then, even after all the decisions, there were still questions swirling around in my head. What if? What if I was wrong after all? What if I could try to get it all back? I tried to ignore these thoughts, but they came back in those moments when I was alone with myself. Some nights, as I stared at the lights of the city through the window of my apartment, I still thought about what had happened, about us. I tried to figure out exactly what I had done wrong, and in that reflection, I sometimes caught myself thinking that I still cared. But this Paris, these streets, and the people around me kept me going, and I kept going even though I sometimes asked myself these questions. Nevertheless, I knew one thing. This was my chance, a chance for myself, a chance for a fresh start. I could try anything I wanted to try, and nothing else was more important than that. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I could no longer believe in people the way I used to, but I was ready to build my world anew, and that was probably the best step I could have taken. One morning, Waking up in my small Parisian apartment, I suddenly realized that I felt no pain. I felt no remorse or regret for what had happened. Perhaps at some point I would have rushed out to seek solace, but now as I looked at my life, I felt that every minute here was a step toward recovery. I was relearning how to be a woman who wasn't dependent on someone else's expectations. My morning began with a cup of coffee on the balcony where I watched the city come to life. It was my time to be myself. Paris became for me not only a city, but a reflection of inner freedom. It gave me the opportunity to find myself in ways that seemed impossible before. I decided to continue my journey, to look for a job, to develop new skills, and most importantly, to be myself. I enrolled in an art studio where I started painting. In each stroke, I put everything that had accumulated in my soul, everything that I had experienced and that I was trying to express. The first paintings appeared on the walls of my apartment. They were not perfect, but for me, they became a reflection of my path. In each work, I saw the freedom I had found in this city. On one of my walks, I met a woman named Claudette, who was like a guiding star for many who were looking for inspiration in Paris. Claudette invited me to her dinner, and I felt my boundaries expand. She became not just an acquaintance to me, but a mentor who helped me deal with the doubts and fears that once held me back. Paris became more than just a place where I could forget myself. It was my chance to rebuild my life, and I knew that I now had everything I needed to succeed. Over time, I began to realize that freedom is not just a physical space, but also an inner state. In Paris, I found a world where I could be real, where there were no other people's expectations. And that was probably the biggest victory. I started to believe in myself, and every day I spent here gave me more confidence that I could be happy. This city was my true beginning. I sat in my little cafe as the rays of the morning sun softly streamed through the windows. At first, I thought I was just enjoying the silence. But then I realized that every moment here was like a step into a new world where I could be myself. Paris opened up to me not only its streets, but also myself. And although I could not yet completely forget everything I had left behind, I already felt that this place was mine. This city was a symbol for me that I was free, that my life did not depend on the past, but began with a clean slate. It had been months since I had come here, and even though every day was filled with new opportunities, I still couldn't help but feel the traces of what had happened. Sometimes, sitting in a cafe and looking at the people around me, I would suddenly wonder, what would it be like if I hadn't left? But such thoughts disappeared as quickly as they came. I realized that my choice was the right one. Even if it was hard, I believed that everything that had happened had made me stronger. Paris taught me to be different. This city, where I was not tied to the past, gave me a chance to see the world anew. Its bustling markets, narrow streets, and ancient buildings were like a mirror, which I began to see new possibilities for myself. I no longer felt I had to prove anything to anyone. I was here for me, and it was the best thing to do. I began to realize how much this city had changed me. Everything I did became not only an experiment, but a true search for myself. At times I felt that, despite my best efforts, I needed more time to get used to my new life. But in those moments, I just looked around,